Hello, everyone. You're listening to Alternative Revelations with Linda Emanuel. And today is podcast number 23. And I was going to talk about how to protect your pet from cancer and disease, but I have to wait to do that podcast. Friday, I'm going to interview somebody that I know that I helped get their pet well, and she's only available Friday, and this is Tuesday. So instead, this podcast is going to be about heart disease and what causes heart disease. Actually, there are two ways to get heart disease, but I'll go into that. But first, I have to read this disclaimer. These podcasts are for informational purposes only. I am not a doctor, nor am I a licensed practitioner. I cannot give medical advice. I am only a researcher searching for the truth and passing that truth on to listeners. And with that said and done, I can begin the podcast. Now, I knew from reading mycoplasma literature that mycoplasma played a role in heart disease, but I never could figure out how it played the role. But now I do. And I'm going to give you a start of how mycoplasma can be the cause of heart disease. Now, heart disease didn't become prevalent in the 1900s until the introduction of MSG, but I'll get into that later. But I'm going to start over with mycoplasma, what happens when you have a mycoplasma infection, and how this can lead to heart disease. And what happens is mycoplasma is a total parasite. It needs a host for all the material it needs to replicate. So what it does, it penetrates a cell, gets inside the cell is helpless on the inside, takes apart that cell, the cell dies. The cell ruptures. Out of the cell spill the contents of the cell along with the replicated mycoplasma. And one of the contents of the cell is a protein called glutamate. And glutamate is an excitotoxin. It fires nerve cells and is used for cell-to-cell communication. But when glutamate hits the bloodstream, the body automatically has a chemical reaction. It cannot tolerate glutamate in the bloodstream. So to turn glutamate into glutamine, the following chemical reaction occurs. It takes an ammonia ion off of urea in the blood. When this happens, a cyanide ion is released. It is uptaken by a neighboring cell and shuts the mitochondria down, which is your cell battery, and makes energy. And when the mitochondria is shut down, this is what people experience as chronic fatigue, but there's a lot more to it. Now, I used to watch Lindsay Wagner's documentaries, and he had on a cancer and disease video, and he talked about these scientists getting millions of dollars of Nobel Peace Prize for discovering that protein modification in the body caused heart disease. And I was really interested in this, and I started really investigating, and that's when the whole puzzle came together. Now, what happens when protein modification in the body occurs, which is glutamate being turned into glutamine, and ADMA, this is what they discovered, and ADMA is created. And this stands for asymmetric dimethylargine. Now I'm going to stop here, and I want you to notice that this ADMA, part of the second word, contains arginine. That is very important to remember later, arginine. Now I'm going to continue. And what happens is the innermost lining of your arteries, there is a layer of cells called endothelial cells. And I'm going to stop here and explain what an endothelial cell is. Endothelial cells are the innermost lining of blood vessels. Endothelium is only one cell thick. Therefore, it cannot be seen by the naked eye. When the smooth muscles that surround the blood vessels constrict, nerve stimulation prompts the endothelial cells to synthesize, or in other words, manufacture and release small amounts of nitric oxide. And what nitric oxide is this? Nitric oxide is a gas molecule that has a life of just a few seconds. Nitric oxide is manufactured in the endothelium, which is the innermost lining of blood vessels. When the endothelium is healthy and producing nitric oxide, the endothelium is as smooth as Teflon. When it is not producing and releasing nitric oxide, the endothelial cells become sticky and become vulnerable to bacterial plaque accumulation. Now, this is the definition, or this is what nitric oxide does. Nitric oxide eliminates inflammation in the blood vessels associated with plaque. It inhibits the formation of plaque in the blood vessels. Most importantly, dilates and relaxes blood vessels and increases blood flow. Now, the endothelial cells, when your blood vessels or when your arteries constrict, meaning tighten up, the endothelial cells take arginine, which is a protein, and it turns it into nitric oxide. And nitric oxide relaxes your blood vessels, and that keeps you from having high blood pressure. So the ADMA, protein modification, creates an ADMA. The ADMA blocks arginine from being turned into nitric oxide. And I'm going to add that glutamate, glutamine, and arginine are in the same family of proteins. And what happens is, and I'm not a scientist, I can't prove it, but the ADMA must change the arginine, and the arginine cannot be then changed to nitric oxide. And this is what those scientists or doctors discovered. And then what happens is this. The inside wall of the arteries becomes sticky, and things can start adhering to them, along with cholesterol and mycoplasma. And mycoplasma colonize. Birds of a feather stick together. And they build biofilm around the colony to protect themselves from the immune system. And biofilm is made of protein. And also, if you remember from a previous podcast, all your cells are held together with protein and protein receptors. And this is all the plaque that is found in arteries, and also carpal tunnel, and also mycoplasma plaque in Alzheimer's. So indirectly, mycoplasma starts the ball rolling. But the body's kind of working against itself because it turns glutamate into glutamine. And actually, glutamate, glutamine, and arginine are all in the same family of proteins. So these scientists never did figure out about mycoplasma or glutamate or what causes this protein modification in the body. All they did was figure out that protein modification in the body created an ADMA, and this blocked nitric oxide from being made by the endothelial cells. The endothelial cells started becoming sticky, and things started adhering to them, and people developed heart disease. Now, in the old days, I guess people didn't live long enough to get heart disease, but in today's world, in 1909, MSG was introduced into our world. And MSG stands for monosodium glutamate. And yes, MSG contains glutamate. It's in mostly all processed and restaurant food, especially in mixes for seasoning. So a lot of restaurants, a lot of big restaurants, put glutamate in their food. And maybe this contributes to why heart disease is the number one killer in America. Now, our government, the FDA, allows food manufacturers to disguise the fact that MSG is in the food by disguising it on the label. If they take that sodium molecule out of monosodium glutamate, it is allowed to be called natural flavorings. They do disguise it. And obviously, This means that they know it is harmful for us. And this is a sign of deceit. That's my take on it. And there is only one country in the entire world who has banned MSG, and I'll reveal that in a few minutes. But in the meantime, these are the symptoms of MSG, and a lot of them are mycoplasma infection symptoms, and they are as follows: headache, fatigue, flushing, sweating, numbness, and tingling or burning in the face, neck, and other areas, rapid fluttering heartbeats, chest pain, and nausea. I always wondered why some people who did not show signs of a mycoplasma infection, yet they got heart disease. The introduction in 1909 of MSG to the American continent could explain the reason why heart disease is the number one killer in America, even higher rates than cancer. And in my opinion, MSG is the culprit, the bottom line, the cause. And the food industry is very deceptive about this, hiding the fact that MSG is in food. And this is a telltale sign that somebody is hiding the truth. And I am going to tell you the country, the only country in the world who's figured it out, I guess, that bans MSG from food is Pakistan. Now, I'm not going to get off the topic of heart disease, but I'm going to talk about a movie called Forks Over Knives. And one of my challenges is to prove why something works. And in the movie Forks Over Knives, the documentary reinforces that a plant-based diet reverses disease and cancer. Now, researchers in this documentary proved that people who adopt a plant-based diet have less chance of getting cancer and disease compared to people who eat a Western diet of high intake of animal and dairy proteins. In the documentary, a doctor reversed cardiovascular disease in 18 of his patients by putting them on a plant-based diet. 10 years later, these patients were still on a plant-based diet, healthy and disease-free. Further, 2 diabetic patients reversed their diabetes by eating a plant-based diet. One thing interesting that I find fun is that these documentaries never tell you why. They just tell you this is what happened and this is it. And this is my favorite thing to do, is to investigate and find out why. I'm just wired different, I guess. And the following is why this movie, Forks Over Knives, why these people reverse their disease. And there's a couple explanations, or combinations, that is. And it goes as follows. First is the dairy connection. The documentary mentions China did a 30-year study of cancer and disease. The study did show that Chinese who ate dairy were more prone to cancer, but they could not explain why. Now the answer is milk is a favorite food of anaerobic organisms such as mycoplasma. Now you always wonder why cheese kind of has its odor and this is embarrassing. Your feces has such an odor. This is why. An end product of anaerobic bacterial fermentation is buryric acid, Buryc, which has a very unpleasant odor. Produced by the skin flora, which is bacteria, under the arms from the fermentation of the lipids in sweat. This is the cause of body odor. Buryric acid is what makes feces smell so bad. Buryric acid is also in milk. So, it's obvious. Bacteria like milk. So people who drink milk, the Chinese study showed that people who drank milk were more prone to get cancer and disease because you are giving the anaerobic bacteria a food source. So you can come to your own conclusions, but I'm going to keep going on. There's a lot more. Now, getting back to the documentary Forks Over Knives, there are actually two explanations as to why these people reverse their heart disease and also reverse their diabetes. The first is that they went to an alkaline diet, and mycoplasma does not flourish in an alkaline environment. And what determines your pH is minerals, and the only source of minerals that are alkaline are in fruits and vegetables. So that is one reason why they reversed their disease. They actually made it an alkaline environment, which is inhospitable to mycoplasma. Now there's another explanation. And by the way, of all the things I researched for my book, Alternative Revelations, this was my most favorite story to research. It all began in 1890s. There's a man by the name of John Beard who was born on November 2nd, 1858 in England. He was born into humble surroundings where both his father and grandfather worked in local cotton mills. Now, according to sources, John Beard was ambitious and had a greater goal in life than following in his father's footsteps. Eventually, Beard had the opportunity to attend college and finished his PhD from the University of Edinburgh. Then he received an honorary doctorate of science from the University of Manchester. He received even further education, specializing in embryology. After receiving this training, he returned to England and he went to work for the Scottish Fishery Board. Working for the Scottish Fishery Board, Dr. Beard studied sharks, skates, and rays. After researching fish for 20 years, he left that position and took the position of assistant lecturer of vertebrate embryology at the University of Edinburgh. This is where he did his embryological studies and developed his theory that there was a similarity between embryonic stem cells and cancer cells, namely trophoblast cells and cancer cells. Now, to understand Dr. Beard's theory about enzyme therapy as far as treating cancer, one must understand concepts about the development of an embryo and fetus. And please don't bail out of the podcast because this is so interesting and so educational. And I'm going to explain it in very simple terms. I'm going to start reading you some definitions related to embryonic development. The first concept is the blastocyst. The blastocyst is the structure that is formed around the embryo. The inner cell mass forms the embryo, and the outer cell mass, referred to as trophoblast cells, which eventually form the placenta that attaches to the maternal lining of the uterus. So I'm describing the very first stages of development of an embryo and fetus. Now, the definition of a trophoblast cell is this. The trophoblast is a layer of cells forming the outer ring of the blastocyst that combines with the maternal endometrium to form the placenta. Trophoblast cells secrete enzymes to break down the maternal endometrial cells, the lining, to allow penetration and implantation of the blastocyst in the uterine wall. So remember, the trophoblast forms the placenta that attaches to the uterine wall so the fetus can develop. Now, the following is the key to understanding why Dr. John Beard theorized that enzymes were the body's natural defense against cancer cells. And this is so interesting. Trophoblast cells contain a protein called integrin, integrin, on their outer cell surface, which allows for adhesion of the placenta to the uterine wall. Many molecules of integrin span the trophoblast cell membrane. Most importantly, just one molecule of integrin holds the largest domain of membrane proteins, 1,088 amino acids, more than anywhere else in the human body. All these proteins are necessary to guarantee successful adhesion of the placenta to the surface of the uterus. I'm just stopping here to remind you that all our cells in our body are held together with protein, and the trophoblast has more protein receptors than any other cell in the human body because it absolutely must be able to attach to that uterine wall to sustain life and to continue life of mankind, to continue the life of the embryo, turning into a fetus, turning into a human being. So back to the story. And here is another definition. I might have already mentioned this. Cell adhesion. Cell adhesion is the binding of a cell to a surface or to another cell. Adhesion occurs only from the action of proteins. Cells in our body, again, are attached to each other with protein. Now, John Beard was actually ahead of his time. In fact, he was a genius. He observed in his embryonic research that trophoblast cells are parasitic, meaning they are invasive. Not only were they parasitic, but they posed a problem if they were not stopped after attaching to the uterine wall. They would continue to grow just like cancer cells, forming a choriocarcinoma, which is a deadly tumor, threatening the life of both mother and fetus. Now, this is the theory behind John Beard's enzyme therapy. John Beard also noted, now this is important, that by the 56th day of gestation, the fetus's pancreas had developed and was producing trypsin, an enzyme that breaks down protein. He observed that this is when the parasitic trophoblast cells were destroyed. The trypsin specifically broke down the amino acids in the trophoblast's cell membrane, destroying them. Because of this observation, Dr. Beard logically theorized that since parasitic trophoblast cells resembled cancer cells in nature, that enzymes would break down cancer cells too. Dr. Beard set out to prove his theory, and yes, he proved trypsin was effective against cancer cells and tumors. Dr. Beard first published his findings in 1902 in the distinguished journal Lancet. In the article, Dr. Beard proposed that the enzyme trypsin was the body's main defense against cancer and would be useful as a cancer treatment. Many scientists and doctors embraced his theory, and for the next 20 years, articles were published in medical journals as to the success of enzymes being used to treat cancer. However, Dr. Beard sadly met strong opposition to his enzyme cancer treatment, and you know who that opposition was. On the positive side, Dr. Beard was nominated for the 1905 Nobel Peace Prize for Embryology. In 1911, Dr. Beard published The Enzyme Treatment of Cancer and Its Scientific Basis, which was released by a major publishing company. The book was soon forgotten by the scientific community because they had embraced a new cancer cure: radiation. Now, this is a little bit about Madame Curie. She died of exposure to her own discovery, uranium. In 1924, Dr. Beard passed away. Sadly, the allopathic medical community had adopted the slash, poison, and burn protocols to treat cancer. It was the beginning of the dark ages of medicine, as far as I'm concerned. Now, in my opinion, Dr. Beard was correct in his conclusion that enzymes are one of the body's best defenses against cancer. However, at the time of his research, circa 1890 to 1902, he did not know about mycoplasma. And by the way, mycoplasma was discovered in 1898. Yes, and Dr. Beard knew that trophoblasts had the most protein receptors on their surface, and he also had noted that cancer cells were protein coated, but he probably did not know that this protein coating was mycoplasma plaque. Now, you might have already guessed why pancreatic enzymes are effective against cancer, but the truth about enzyme therapy is as follows. Now, the following partial editorial appeared in the New York Times on October 9th of 1909, when newspapers were still free presses. And I'm going to quote, "In spite of present condemnation of trypsin, there is a large chance that time will tell another story." Now, it has taken over 100 years for the truth to come out. Now, according to Wikipedia, proponents of Dr. Beard's enzyme therapy for the treatment of cancer believe that certain enzymes remove a protective coating from cancer cells. Are you understanding where I'm going? These doctors mistakenly think cancer cells are protein coated like viruses. The aforementioned is part true, that protein coating has not replaced the cancer cell's outer surface. The truth of the matter is that this protein coating around the cancer cell is biofilm, or in other words, plaque, built around the entire mass of cancer cells to protect the colony from the immune system. And I believe that doctors get this confused who are proponents of Dr. Beard's theory, they do not know about mycoplasma, that mycoplasma colonies build plaque around themselves. And this explains why Dr. Beard, who did not know about mycoplasma, why he thought the cancer cell was coated in protein, where he was observing mycoplasma at its work. And they did not have the microscopes in 1892 to even see mycoplasma. So you can't really blame Dr. Beard for not understanding what was really going on with the mycoplasma. Now, using enzyme therapy, the immune system now has a chance to break through the mycoplasma biofilm and destroy the pathogenic colony of mycoplasma. Now I'm going to reveal a revelation that you might not know, and your doctor won't know. Cataracts are bacterial plaque. Carpal tunnel is bacterial plaque. Just like trophoblast cells, anaerobic bacteria secrete protein enzymes referred to as exotoxins to destroy extracellular structures so they can penetrate and attach to the host's tissues. So I have a little fun fact here about lycozymes. Did you ever wonder how a chicken egg, or actually an egg, keeps from getting bacterial infection or bacterial invasion? Now, of course, the eggs are coated with a film, but egg whites contain lycozyme, an enzyme which protects the chick embryo from bacteria, breaking down bacterial cell walls. It is also found in mother's milk and human tear ducts. Cooking the egg whites destroy lycozyme. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about other enzymes besides trypsin. Papain. This enzyme is in papaya and used for thousands of years to tenderize meat, mostly in its native habitat, South America. It is also an ingredient in dental products, helping to break down bacterial plaque on teeth. Bromelain. This protein enzyme is in both the pineapple, the stem, the main stalk, and the leaves of the pineapple plant. And this is a little fun fact. The reason you cannot add fresh pineapple to gelatin or jello is because the bromelain will break down the jello proteins and they won't be able to set. So the aforementioned explains why people who stopped eating meat and went to a plant-based diet, how their own enzymes broke down the plaque in the arteries and also broke down the plaque if they had cancer and disease, broke down the plaque of the mycoplasma colony so their immune system could do its job. It's that simple. That's my favorite story about John Beard. He's my hero. And we could use more heroes like him in this world that is so dark, especially in the medical industry. Now, I'm also going to reveal a story that you probably never have figured out yourself, or maybe you would have after listening to this story. But, history fascinates me. And especially during the Tudor times, and Queen Mary, Bloody Mary, who was succeeded the throne after Henry VIII, her father, and she wreaked havoc. She was actually the bloodiest monarch in England. She married the a Spanish prince. I think his name was Philip, and she got pregnant, so she says. Now this ties in with this podcast, and it developed into a tumor. Now, I theorize from what I mentioned earlier about John Beard's findings about how the trophoblast can keep parasitic and form a choriocarcinoma tumor. I really do believe this is what happened to Bloody Mary, that she was pregnant and then it developed into a tumor which killed her. And that's my take on it. So that wraps up podcast number 23. All about heart disease and enzyme therapy. I hope you enjoyed this podcast. I really did enjoy researching John Beard and revealing the truth behind enzyme therapy, and actually the truth about heart disease. I'm educating myself every day by researching, and the hardest part is to decipher junk from the truth, and I just have to trust God that I am being led down the right path. And again, it's all about educating yourself. And the next podcast will be about how to protect your pets from cancer and disease, and how to get your pet well from cancer and disease. So until next time, good night and God bless.